Donald Trump's primetime address to Congress hours after firing the opening round in a trade war against Canada.
Other countries have used tariffs against us for decades, and now it's our turn.
What he said in tonight's high-stakes speech, the Prime Minister's pointed message.
Even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do.
And the signs of a potential opening in the negotiations. From canceled American contracts to pulling American liquor, how provinces are pushing back as U.S. and Canadian markets tumble for a second straight day. Plus, a look at what will cost you more. The Canadian acts of patriotism and defiance.
So we pulled all the liquor right away, and then we made the effort to get all of our food products now to make sure that they are not sourced in the USA.
And chaos in Parliament. We'll tell you where this dramatic scene unfolded and what triggered it.
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina.
Good evening on an extraordinary day in the history of Canada-U.S. relations and day one of a trade war that now includes America's three biggest trading partners. The U.S. president delivering the first joint address to Congress of his second term. Divisions apparent mere minutes into his speech.
Small business optimism saw its single largest one-month gain ever recorded, a 41-point jump.
Members are directed to uphold and maintain decorum in the House and to cease any further disruptions.
Texas Democratic Congressman Al Green repeatedly heckled the president and was ordered removed by the speaker. CTV's Judy Trin joins me now from Washington. And Judy, Donald Trump taking shots at Joe Biden, recapping many of the executive orders he signed and insisting that America was back despite a crushing day on the markets and warnings his tariffs will hurt Americans. But he doubled down on those tariffs tonight. What did he say?
Omar, the president continued to accuse Canada and Mexico of not doing enough to stop the illegal flow of fentanyl into the U.S. That's the reason he was using to justify the tariffs, which also are managing to drive manufacturing back to the U.S. Then the president listed another bunch of countries that could be targeted.
If you don't make your product in America, however, under the Trump administration, you will pay a tariff, and in some cases, a rather large one. Other countries have used tariffs against us for decades, and now it's our turn to start using them against those other countries. On average, the European Union, China, Brazil, India, Mexico, and Canada, have you heard of them?
So threats of expanding that trade war. Now, despite that tough talk, Judy, a key member of Donald Trump's administration creating a slight opening with Canada possibly today.
Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said that the president was listening to concerns from Canadian and Mexican officials and was considering a change to the tariff policy. Take a listen.
The president's listening because he's very, very fair and very reasonable. So I think he's going to work something out with them. It's not going to be a pause, none of that pause stuff, but I think he's going to figure out you do more and I'll meet you in the middle some way.
Before the U.S. launched its trade war, they didn't have any communications with us, any of us. And there are many, many of us that were in contact with the Trump administration until then. They didn't only do that to us, they did that to the Mexicans as well. So this is clearly a strategy.
A lot of skepticism in Melanie Joly's voice. Now, Omar, Howard Lutnick says that change to the policy is expected on Wednesday, but Canadian officials say they'll believe it when they see it.
A lot of fast-moving developments. CTV's Judy Trin in Washington tonight. Judy, thank you. The Prime Minister insisted Canada will not back down from a fight and launched counter-tariffs as premiers activated their own battle plans. BC and Manitoba pulling American liquor from store shelves and Ontario doing the same while also ripping up a $100 million contract with Elon Musk's Starlink and banning American companies from bidding on public contracts. Here's CTV's senior political correspondent Michael Couture with what else is on the table.
Even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do.
A direct shot at U.S. President Donald Trump. The Prime Minister also laid out the economic damage this will do to the entire continent. And Justin Trudeau dismissed the American argument that this has anything to do with the flow of fentanyl into the United States, calling it completely bogus.
What he wants is to see a total collapse of the Canadian economy, because that'll make it easier to annex us.
Vowing not to back down, Trudeau announced counter tariffs on $30 billion worth of American goods. In 3 weeks, another $125 billion worth of U.S. imports could also face levies. Governments across the country are looking at other ways to hit back.
Effective immediately, our liquor stores will be pulling all red state liquor products off of the shelf.
Several other provinces are doing the same, while Ontario Premier Doug Ford is considering going even further.
If the Trump administration falls through on any more tariffs, we will immediately apply a 25% surcharge on the electricity we export.
In what's being described as a tough and aggressive call today, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick asked Ford to back off his threats. However, Ford refused as long as the American tariffs remain in place. But export taxes on Alberta energy is not something Premier Daniel Smith is considering.
I've already said that we're not going to retaliate on energy.
Opposition leaders also stood firm against the U.S. trade action, but they had their own suggestions for how the government should help Canadians.
Counter tariffs must not be a cash cow for the government. Almost every penny of the tariffs collected should go to tax cuts.
In a call with the premiers today, the federal government said an initial relief package to help mitigate the impact of U.S. tariffs on Canadian workers, families, and businesses will be announced soon. Omar.
All right, Mike, thank you. Canada is not the only country hit by Donald Trump's tariffs, and the others are also planning to fight back.
Hemos decidido responder.
Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum says she will announce retaliatory tariffs against the U.S. on Sunday. And China announced additional 10 to 15% tariffs on American agricultural products, saying if the U.S. wants a trade war, China will, quote, play along to the end. As we mentioned, the escalating trade war is rattling North American markets, the Dow tumbling more than 1,300 points in the past 2 days, and another steep triple-digit loss on the TSX 2, which hit a 7-week low. Here's John Venivalu-Rao on the plunge.
As the opening bell sounded, there was little to cheer. Traders watching as markets, as of this morning, had wiped out all of the gains they'd made this year. And on Bay Street, some worried it was just the start of the pain.
Trump's going to crash the bond market and the stock market. Yeah. This is the beginning. It's not over.
At one point, Toronto's main index was down more than 2%, while stocks plunged in Europe, fell in Asia, and U.S. markets continued their sharp sell-off.
The NASDAQ is officially in correction. That means it's down more than 10% from its high.
Though the NASDAQ recovering slightly as the day wore on.
I think investors are still somewhat hopeful that this won't evolve into a full-on trade war that lasts for a long period of time.
Investors worry such a trade war could lead to higher consumer prices and reignite inflation, while slowing growth both in the U.S. and Canada, possibly leading to a recession.
This is a big problem for Canada. This is a recession-sized problem.
Still, given the U.S. president has historically viewed stock market performance as a key indicator of a success, some think the plunge could prompt him to reverse course.
Nobody really knows the answer. I don't think the president of the U.S. knows the answer, to be honest. So we're going to have to wait and see here.
Notably, though, despite all the chaos, the loonie stayed at around 69 cents U.S. Omar.
All right, John, thanks. And there are already warnings about what the Trump-provoked trade war with Canada, Mexico, and China will mean for American consumers. Shipping giant Maersk says it will cost more to move goods. U.S. insurance giant Progressive sees higher insurance rates as cars get more expensive. Best Buy warns vendors would pass on higher prices for electronics. And Target CEO said this about the price of fruits and vegetables from Mexico.
Consumer will likely see price increases over the next couple of days.
CTV's Rachel Aiello joins us now. So, Rachel, break down which specific items on our shopping list are about to get more expensive.
With both the U.S. and Canadian governments imposing tariffs, which are a tax on imported goods, consumers on both sides of the border will be paying more. Trump's tariffs make Canadian products going into the U.S. more expensive, hurting homegrown businesses who export, but also everyday Americans, as U.S. companies that buy Canadian will bear the cost and surely pass it on to their customers. It goes both ways, though. Canada's retaliation targets key U.S. sectors, but consumers on this side of the border will see prices rise on items such as your morning coffee or orange juice, the ingredients that make meals taste better, such as butter and spices, as well as the appliances you cook them with, cocktail essentials such as liquor and bitters, shampoo, deodorant, underwear, and the clothing you put on top, plus handbags, helmets, and home building materials. Though federal officials say these items were chosen to minimize the impact on shoppers in this country, as there are made-in-Canada alternatives. And this is just phase one. Canada plans to impose a larger round of tariffs on targeted U.S. products in 21 days. That list is expected to include heavy machinery, motorboats, and parachutes. Omar?
All right, Rachel, thank you. The tariffs have jolted key sectors across the country, from potash to lumber. Our coverage of the industry reaction begins with CTV's Heather Wright, who is in Windsor, Ontario, again tonight. Heather, what are auto workers saying?
Omar, traffic has been steady along the Ambassador Bridge today. Truckers making their usual crossings despite the uncertainty that looms.
On the surface, today was an ordinary Tuesday.
From Ontario first to Michigan, and then I came back empty. I'm going to do a pickup right now.
And everything was totally normal?
Yeah, totally normal.
But it's not business as usual for companies here. Hasn't been for months.
So anything you see here will have a 25% tariff on it.
Louis Yon runs JE Fixture and Tool in Windsor, Ontario, which designs and manufactures equipment to make auto parts. He says the company hasn't received any new orders in weeks amid the uncertainty. And now that tariffs have arrived, he predicts business is not going to shift south, but rather east.
They don't have the resources in the United States to take on what we do, but China does. And China is hungry right now. He's going to force everybody to China.
Margins are thin to begin with in the auto industry, and parts cross the border multiple times during the manufacturing process. A tariff at each crossing quickly makes North American cars unprofitable. Industry groups warn the auto industry could shut down in a little more than a week, putting hundreds of thousands of people out of work on both sides of the border.
There's 900,000 people that make cars and parts in the U.S. that will be out of work within a week or so. And they're all in states that delivered the presidency. It is a big mess, and it's going to hurt.
Groups within the auto industry say they are planning to fight these tariffs in U.S. court, but they face an uphill battle. Heather Wright, CTV News, Windsor, Ontario.
I'm Allison Bamford in Saskatoon, where some of the world's largest potash producers are warning a key ingredient in American-grown food is being threatened under the tariffs. Pink gold that lays the groundwork for a good crop. Canada supplies more than 80% of the potash used on American farms.
Potash is a big player in crop health and straw strength.
And a key ingredient in fertilizer. Christian Hebert's Saskatchewan farm uses about 1,000 tons of potash each year, and without it,
probably makes your crop more susceptible to disease throughout the year.
South of the border, the mineral is even more valuable as farmers plant different crops in different soil types.
Corn, it is a crop that demands a lot of nutrition.
Millions of tons of fertilizer flow into the U.S. every year.
A 25% tariff gives growers two options: increase their budget or cut back on fertilizer.
If they try to cut back by 10 or 20% on the amount of fertilizer that's needed, that's going to have a direct impact on their yields.
A decision farmers need to make soon, with spring planting season right around the corner. Allison Bamford, CTV News, Saskatoon.
I'm Andrew Johnson in Chilliwack, BC, where sawmills like this one are already reaching out to their U.S. customers at the start of a trade war that could seriously cut into the lumber business.
So far, those customers have continued to send in POs, purchase orders, and kind of business as usual. But today's a new day, and we'll see what happens.
This is straight edge milling, about an hour east of Vancouver. Close to half of the billions of dollars in softwood lumber Canada sends to the U.S. each year comes from British Columbia. The Premier has called Trump's tariffs a massive threat to the industry. Donald Trump claims America doesn't need Canadian lumber because it has forests of its own. But BC producers say the Canadian product is in a league of its own.
It's just a way higher quality. We're on the coast, and the species that we saw here are unique to this area. For one thing, you can't really buy it anywhere else. And then in the interior mills, where there's a shorter growing season, the lumber is just superior to what they can manufacture in the U.S.
In addition to today's tariffs, the U.S. is also threatening more lumber-specific levies later this year. It all adds up to a lot of uncertainty at mills like this one. Andrew Johnson, CTV News, Chilliwack, BC.
Uncertainty at that mill and nationwide. Our CTV News reporters spoke to Canadians across the country today for their reaction. Here's what they said.
My reaction is that Donald Trump is a maniac and that he's trying to ruin everybody except himself. And we have to really stand firm in Canada.
I think that we definitely will see an increase in like everyday commodities.
I think prices are gone crazy, but we are shopping local where we can.
And then gets passed on to the consumers as well. So for both parties, if the government comes in and says it's for the people, I don't think it should make things worse for people.
I think that's not going to lead to anything that is going to benefit Canada.
Tightening the belt in many areas until I'm hoping this blows over because it's too ridiculous to be real.
Things are not looking good. It's going to be tough for a lot of families.
It's going to definitely add to the cost in the U.S. to the meat products, but maybe our price is going to slide a little bit here. It's hard to understand it on day one.
We need to work on making things easier to go across Canada instead of across the border.
Coming up, which province's premier is threatening to cut off fuel for U.S. military jets? Plus, what triggered this parliamentary punch-up and where? New Brunswick is expected to get hit particularly hard by U.S. tariffs, but the premier is threatening to hit back. CTV's Sarah Plowman has more from St. John on what's at stake. Sarah.
Omar, in Atlantic Canada, trade relationships with Americans run deep. At times, they go back generations. Today, New Brunswick's Premier Susan Holt said this is a turning point, while noting that this is the most U.S. trade-dependent province in the country. One of the big exports here is petroleum products.
The president might not realize that we supply American defense with jet fuel, and if you go to the base in Maine or down the eastern seaboard, those defense planes don't get in the air without Canadian jet fuel.
St. John is the most tariff-exposed city in the country, according to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. It's home to the country's largest oil refinery, where 80% of what's processed goes to the States. But fisheries and forestry are also huge economic players in this city, and they're expected to be hit hard. New Brunswick's premier says about 6,000 jobs are at risk. The province today rolled out a more than $160 million plan, in part to support workers and companies that export heavily to the United States. But here, Omar, the pain isn't just professional. It really feels personal. Omar.
So many feeling that way. Sarah, thank you. Still ahead, the olive branch after an Oval Office meltdown. Ukraine's president struck a conciliatory tone today, one day after Donald Trump shut out all military aid to the country. Volodymyr Zelensky praised the U.S. president's, quote, strong leadership and called Friday's explosive White House meeting, quote, regrettable. And in a letter, Trump says Zelensky wrote to him the Ukrainian president was willing to sign a minerals deal at any time that is convenient for Washington.
I appreciate that he sent this letter to Scott a little while ago. Simultaneously, we've had serious discussions with Russia and have received strong signals that they are ready for peace. Wouldn't that be beautiful? Wouldn't that be beautiful?
A different kind of political confrontation erupted dramatically in Serbia's parliament today. Opposition lawmakers lit flares and threw smoke grenades inside the chamber. 3 members of the ruling party were injured, including a pregnant woman and a lawmaker who suffered a stroke. Today's actions follow months of student-led demonstrations over government corruption and incompetence. The ruling coalition says Western intelligence agencies are trying to destabilize the country. Still ahead, how Canadians are standing on guard against American tariffs. The trade war instigated by U.S. President Donald Trump has galvanized Canadians from coast to coast to fly the flag and fight back. CTV's Adrian Gobriel now on the patriotic push from the boardrooms to the bar rooms and barns.
A relationship on thin ice. Just yesterday, an American flag was on display inside this Barrie, Ontario hockey arena. That was until the city's mayor ordered it removed.
It's inappropriate for the flag of another country that's threatening the sovereignty of our country and the livelihoods of our people to be flying inside of our facilities.
Canadian acts of defiance are sweeping across the country.
Donald Trump is a short-sighted man.
In Nova Scotia, tolls for U.S. commercial vehicles have been doubled, and a prohibition on all U.S. alcohol has taken hold. Ditto for Ontario, where Made in America beverages from 35 states were cleared from provincial liquor stores. The U.S. booze ban also taking place in Manitoba, where this massive Canadian flag has been installed on the front of the provincial legislature.
I'm a Canadian through and through. I was born here.
And now everyday Canadians are taking up the fight. Toronto's Madison Avenue pub has been open for more than 40 years. For decades, they've sold Kentucky bourbon and California Cabernets. Not anymore.
So we've pulled liquor. Food items, we're going through it now to make sure that we are 100% non-USA.
Chris, for you, this is personal.
I don't want someone threatening us as a sovereign nation. This is our country.
In Victoria, BC, some Canadians have abandoned ship, with ferry service to the U.S. down 20% as the century-long relationship is left listing.
Here at the Madison Avenue pub, they tell us their ban on American ingredients and beverages is indefinite, and at this point, they may never bring them back. Omar.
All right, Adrian, thank you. And that's a snapshot of this Tuesday for all of us at CTV National News. Thank you for watching. Good night and see you tomorrow.